Streaming. All right, we are live, and welcome into LASMNY and Pine Tree Legal Assistance Town Hall on farm worker protections. I am Alex Simon, Director of Development and Communication at LASMNY, and we have 4 guests with us today. I'm just going to go around clockwise, and we'll introduce ourselves, talk about our background, and go from there. So go ahead, shoot, Nicholas.
Yes, hello. My name is Nicholas Meyer. I'm a farm worker attorney at Pine Tree Legal Assistance, which is in Maine. I'm actually in Augusta, Maine. I've been representing farm workers in Maine and Washington State for many years. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. Go ahead, Diego.
Hi, everyone. My name is Diego Grossman. I'm a paralegal with Pine Tree Legal Assistance located in Bangor, and I help Mike and Nicholas work with lots of clients and spearhead a lot of communication and going back and forth between them. And I'm from Maine, and my family's also from Venezuela, so that's probably how I got into this, just having an immigrant background and realizing that a lot of farm workers were really right next door to me later in my young adult life. So that's kind of how I got into this line of work.
Awesome. And Diego will be translating for us the questions and the answers after we talk about them with the attorneys in English. So he will be a valuable asset for us today. Go ahead, Mike.
Hi, my name is Mike Guare. I'm a staff attorney at Pine Tree Legal in the Farmworker unit. I've been at Pine Tree since 1998 and have been representing farm workers the whole time that I've been at Pine Tree.
Okay, excellent. And Elena?
Hi, I'm Elena Varvalucas. I am a staff attorney with the Farmworker Law Project at the Legal Aid Society of Mid-New York. I am sort of coming up on a year doing this work, and I got into representing farm workers. I have an international background and a lot of work internationally, and I think combined with that, I've always been really interested in communities that lack access to resources because they're in more rural areas, and I sort of see this as an opportunity to help contribute those resources to those areas.
Okay, excellent. So broadly, my first question really is, talk about what you are seeing in the national and the state level, because I imagine you follow this in both terms, both contexts. What are you seeing with agricultural workers during this time of COVID? We'll start, I think we'll continue with the Nicholas and then go to Mike and Elena.
Well, one thing that we continue to see year after year is failure to keep pre-employment recruiting promises. That is, promises that are made to lure workers, in effect, from faraway places to come to the state of Maine, and then having those promises broken once the workers get to Maine. Another big item that we see is unsafe or unsanitary employer-provided housing. This is when workers are put up in places supplied by the employer and they fail to meet federal regulations or state regulations, such as not being inspected or being overcrowded.
Okay. Mike?
Agriculture is, not many people would guess this, but agriculture, according to the Department of Labor, is the 3rd most dangerous occupation in the country. The rate of injuries is very high among farm workers, and we see a lot of workers' compensation cases. We try to refer as many of those as we can to other attorneys or other resources. We have a significant amount of intake on workers' comp, and I know LASMNY does as well. One thing that's worth mentioning, I think, is the elephant in the room with farm workers is that there's a very significant percentage of farm workers, leaving aside for the moment whether they're eligible for our services or not. There's a very substantial number of farm workers out there who are in either tenuous or no immigration status. And one of the things that I'm personally hoping happens with the Biden administration is that an immigration bill is passed, which includes, and the one that has been proposed, as I understand it, does include a legalization program for farm workers. That would be, I think that would be an enormous step forward if it happens, because people who are insecure in their legal status are much less likely to insist upon their rights. And when folks are feeling secure and more comfortable and understand that they're not going to be deported for making a complaint, I think we're going to have a much better platform on which to assist workers in enforcing their rights.
Okay, Elena?
Yeah, so I wanted to just talk really quickly about COVID and sort of what's going on. I mean, I guess I'll be talking a bit about New York, but I think it's something that's kind of applicable everywhere in this country right now. So I mean, at first, when the COVID pandemic first started, I think, a lot of our concern was that a lot of farm workers live in housing where they're living in close proximity to other farm workers. They're sharing rooms. Sometimes it's dormitory style. And there's not a lot of distance that is sort of naturally available in those settings. And you saw it at first. We did have a few pretty significant outbreaks in farms that had this kind of housing or housing workers in motel rooms, for instance, 4 to a motel room. And so, a lot of the things we were seeing and a lot of things we were focusing on was trying to get out there, what kind of things people could do to be protecting themselves, protecting their coworkers, protecting their families. And now it's sort of all about vaccines. And so who's eligible, when they're eligible, when are farm workers going to be put on the eligibility list? Will there be, separate batches of vaccines set aside that are going to these populations? Are H-2A workers that come in only for a few months each year, is there going to be a considered effort to reach them as well, especially in the fall is when we see a lot of H-2A workers here in New York. And so that's kind of state level, our big focus right now. But again, I think that's applicable nationwide, and I imagine in Maine as well. So.
Could I jump in and ask Elena to address briefly? One of the things I'm very curious about is what the current state. New York is one of only a few states in the country that has even attempted to pass minimum wage, overtime, and collective bargaining rights for farm workers. And I wonder if you could tell us what exactly is happening in New York with that right now.
Sure. So there was, a bill passed that amended the labor law that established a wage board. So right now, farm workers who work more than 60 hours a week are entitled to overtime to 1.5 times their normal rate of pay once they work more than those 60 hours. And also if they work on a 7th consecutive day on their day of rest. And what's supposed to happen is that this wage board is supposed to meet and discuss whether or not to lower that 60-hour threshold to anywhere, I imagine, between 40 and 60. They've sort of delayed that, sort of kicked the can down the line a little bit, and it's my understanding that nothing's really going to happen on that until the end of the year now, and it's like sort of up in the air. Right now, the rule is 60 hours. So.
And is collective bargaining in place?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's something that we're involved with a lot, but it is in place. It is in the law. Yeah.
Right. We made an attempt a couple of years ago in Maine to amend our statutes to include collective bargaining and minimum wage and overtime protections, and it didn't work, but it's been reintroduced this year, and I'm hoping something happens. And part of the reason for that is that, I mean, there's no active unionization on the ground here in Maine among farm workers. But collective bargaining statutes also include protection for what's called concerted activity, which is hugely important because if under the law here in Maine now, if two workers were to get together and decide that there was something they needed to address, or a group of workers got together and decided there was something that they needed to address with their employer, assuming that didn't rise to the level of something else which is illegal, like discrimination, and they went to the employer and got fired for their efforts, there'd be literally nothing that we could do to protect them. But concerted activity protection would give folks a protection against that kind of retaliation. And I presume and I hope that the law in New York has that as part of it, and as part of collective bargaining rights. And we're really hoping we get that here in Maine as well. I have had meetings with workers where I've had to tell them, you can talk to your employer about this. What they're doing is not illegal. It's really awful, but it's not illegal. But if you do that, you might get fired, and I wouldn't be able to help you if that happens.
Diego, do you just want to give a summary in Spanish for our farm workers that are native to that language?
Sure. Entonces, los abogados preguntaron cuáles son algunos de los problemas que estamos viendo al nivel nacional y estatal para trabajadores agrícolas durante esta pandemia. Nicolás explicó que cada año vemos que las promesas que se le hacen cuando se reclutan a los trabajadores no se honran, que se hacen promesas antes de que llegan los trabajadores y después se rompen, y que también vemos que el alojamiento muchas veces no es sanitario ni cumple con estándares nacionales y estatales. Mike dijo que el trabajo agrícola es el tercer trabajo más mortal y peligroso en el país, y que se ven muchísimos casos de compensación obrera por lo peligroso que es en Pine Tree y en LASMNY también. Y que una cosa muy importante es que muchos de los trabajadores agrícolas están en una posición de inmigración muy difícil, con falta de documentos o con estatus muy frágiles, y que esperamos que la nueva administración pueda darle la oportunidad a que los trabajadores agrícolas tengan la oportunidad de obtener la ciudadanía o permanencia legal en los Estados Unidos, porque muchas veces cuando los trabajadores agrícolas tienen una situación migratoria mucho más estable, es más fácil que hablen sobre los problemas en su trabajo sin tener miedo de represalia, y que hagan que sus derechos se cumplan cuando están mucho más seguros de que no puedan deportarlos o que tengan que salir del país y sin poder hablar de ese tipo de cosas. Laina explicó que muchos trabajadores viven en situaciones donde hay muchísima gente, por ejemplo, en un tráiler o en un cuarto de hotel o del alojamiento que tengan, y es que estas condiciones muy cercanas en cuartos pequeños han sido muy peligrosas durante la pandemia, y que ahora un gran enfoque de la ayuda legal para trabajadores agrícolas es el tema de las vacunas y ver cuándo calificarán los trabajadores agrícolas y si, por ejemplo, trabajadores con estatuses como H2A que están acá por poco tiempo, si ellos podrán vacunarse. Y este es un gran enfoque ahora, tanto nacionalmente como estatalmente. Mike explicó que Nueva York es uno de los únicos estados con nuevas leyes para proteger el derecho para que trabajadores agrícolas no solamente tengan salario mínimo, pero también tengan protecciones para negociación colectiva con uniones o sindicatos. Alaina respondió que si ahora se ha establecido una organización para gerir los salarios mínimos de trabajadores agrícolas, pero que ahora están discutiendo cuántas horas los trabajadores agrícolas necesitarían trabajar para poder tener protecciones de salario mínimo, y que ahora son 60 horas y no sabemos si esto va a bajar, al menos en Nueva York, para que puedan calificar más trabajadores. Y que por ahora, los derechos de protección para negociación colectiva están activos. Mike explicó la importancia de estas leyes especialmente para que los trabajadores no teman represalias y puedan organizarse para poder enforzar sus derechos en muchas áreas que sin la oportunidad de tener las protecciones que trae la habilidad de negociar colectivamente, no hay.
Okay. Let's talk about the three types of workers. There might be more. Elena talked to me about this a little bit yesterday in preparing for the town hall, and the contextual things they need to be aware of. So H-2A, undocumented, and documented workers in this time of COVID, what do they need to be aware of? And we'll start with Nicholas.
Well, speaking generally, it's always a good idea for all workers to record their hours independent of the employer. This ensures that they have a record of the hours that they work. And this applies to workers who are here on a visa, who are documented, who are undocumented. But it's always good to record your hours so that you have your own proof of your wages. All workers should check to make sure that the amount of money they were promised, that they're earning at least the minimum wage, whether they're paid by the piece or by the hour. So in Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire, this is the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. It is more in New York and depends on where you work in New York for what the minimum wage is. And I can leave that to Elena to describe in greater detail. If you're an H-2A worker, you're entitled to what is called the average effect wage rate. This amount in New York and New England was $14.29 an hour in 2020, but it's going to increase in the coming year.
Okay, Mike?
Well, the question, one of the questions obviously that's most important in the coming year or so is what Elena was talking about earlier, which is vaccines. And I think that it's very important for workers to learn as much as they can about the vaccine. There is a considerable amount of misinformation circulating in the community about the vaccine, and it's what are said to be its dangers. And I would urge all workers and all people who work with workers to make sure that correct and accurate information is the basis of any decision that a person makes to have or not have the vaccine. Don't listen to your next door neighbor. Listen to somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Okay, Elena?
Yeah, I guess just, to add on to what Nicholas was saying, I think that unfortunately it's a little bit complicated depending on who you are, whether you're an H-2A worker, whether you're permanent resident or U.S. worker, whether you're undocumented, about which laws you're covered by. So if you're an H-2A worker, you might be covered by H-2A worker or another worker at the farm, at the same farm where H-2A workers are, you might be covered by the H-2A regulations, and you might be covered by the protections in that's contract and in those regulations, but you might not necessarily be protected by Agricultural Worker Protection Act. If you're undocumented, you might be protected by that act, but you might not be protected by, as someone pointed out earlier, a fear of well, you might not be protected in the sense that you face these dangers in that you're undocumented and you don't have papers and you're not working at an H-2A farm either. So it's important that it's too complicated to explain everything here, but it's important that you're aware of who you are and which laws are protecting you, and that's something that Pine Tree can answer for you. If you live in the New England states, it's something that we can answer for you if you call and you're working in New York. So we can sort of explain which laws apply to you and what you're protected by, so that you have an understanding of where you stand and what rights you have, the right to have and the right to stand up for yourself for. Per Nicholas's comments about the minimum wage in New York, it's sort of been steadily going up over the past few years. The aim is to get to $15 eventually in the next year or two everywhere. So if you are in a farm on Long Island or Westchester, Right now, it just went up to $14 an hour. Anywhere else in New York State, except for the city, it's going to be $12.50. But as Nicholas said, if you're on an H-2A farm, or you're an H-2A worker, or you're a worker that's working at this H-2A farm in a similar job, you're going to be entitled to whatever prevailing wage piece rate there is, or the adverse effect wage rate, which, as you said, was $14.29, and it's probably going to go up in the next few weeks for this year.
Okay, Diego, I'll let you translate when you're ready.
Alright, entonces los abogados empezaron a hablar sobre los diferentes tipos de trabajadores en este momento, como trabajadores H2A, no documentados y documentados. Empezaron por decir que es muy importante que los trabajadores registren todas sus horas que trabajan para tener un registro de cuánto le deben sus empleadores. Todos los trabajadores deben chequear que, aunque le paguen por pieza o le paguen por hora, que le estén todavía pagando el salario mínimo, que en Maine es $7.25 por hora, aunque es más en Nueva York. Si eres un trabajador H2A, tienes el derecho a un salario mínimo de alrededor de $14.29 centavos por hora, aunque va a subir este año y continuar a subir. Mike de Pine Tree dijo que es importante que el tema de las vacunas es muy importante para insistir en eso, y que es muy importante que los trabajadores aprendan lo que puedan sobre las vacunas, porque hay mucha mala información sobre la vacuna en la comunidad en este momento, sobre cómo peligros que no existen, y que nosotros le diríamos a todos los trabajadores que busquen la información correcta sobre las vacunas y que escuchen a los expertos y no a sus vecinos. Elena dijo que un tema que es importante es que es muy complicado las diferentes leyes que le aplican a diferentes trabajadores, porque todo esto depende del estatus migratorio. Las leyes que le aplican dependen, por ejemplo, en la misma granja pueden haber diferentes tipos de trabajadores a quienes le aplican diferentes leyes. Pueden haber trabajadores no documentados o trabajadores H2A o trabajadores documentados. Es importante que usted sepa, como un trabajador agrícola, qué estatus tiene y entonces qué leyes le aplican para protegerlo. Y que puede llamarnos a nosotros, a LASMNY o a Pine Tree, Maine, para saber qué derechos tiene y cómo hacer que se cumplan. Finalmente, el salario mínimo en Nueva York ha subido año por año. La meta es subirlo a $15 por estado. Pero es importante que sepa el salario que le aplica en la región donde está. Por ejemplo, en Long Island o Westchester es alrededor de $14 por hora y en el resto del estado es $12.25. Pero como trabajadores H2A, por ejemplo, le aplica el salario mínimo de $14.29, como dijimos antes.
Okay, I wanted to touch on, because Nicholas mentioned this, and I sent it out in the questions, and it could make a big difference in someone's income. What is the difference between hourly rate, which I think we talked a lot about just now, and piece rate? I think most people might understand this, but is one better than the other? And what would you advise if someone's going for an hourly rate or a piece rate? Go ahead, Nicholas.
Well, I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer to this. Getting paid piece rate or by the piece is how workers are often paid. On one hand, it allows fast workers to potentially earn more money than a flat hourly rate. However, employers can also use it to abuse workers and lead to problems if a worker is unable to earn, say, at least the minimum wage when they're working by the piece rate. That is, a worker must be able to earn at least the state or federal minimum wage if it's an H-2A worker, that would be the prevailing wage or the adverse effect wage rate that we discussed earlier.
Okay, Mike?
Just to maybe clarify one point, which is that a worker, whether you're being paid by the hour or by the piece, if you're protected by the minimum wage law, you are entitled to the minimum wage. In New York, Elena's already told us what that is. Here in Maine, for farm workers, it's the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. And even if you are paid by the piece, the amount of money that you earn each week has to equal at least the number of hours you work times whatever the minimum wage is. And if it doesn't, it's the employer's obligation to pay you the difference. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to keep track of your hours, like Nick was saying earlier, because if you keep track of your hours while you're being paid by the piece, each week you'll be able to figure out how much you should have made and whether the piece rate earnings that you have equal the minimum.
Okay, Elena?
Yeah, and just to add to that, if you are on, like Nicholas said, if you are on the H-2A farm and you're being paid piece, your minimum wage, so to speak, is actually that adverse effect wage rate. And so your pieces need to at least add up to that amount per hour. So for last year in New York, it was $14.29. In terms of keeping track of your hours, one of the things that LASMNY and Pine Tree have a long history of doing together is actually distributing calendars that have a lot of farm workers' rights laid out on them, but also literally have a calendar inside where workers can keep track of how many. There, Nicholas is showing it right now. Literally keep track of how many pieces they're picking, or how many hours they're working. Because one of the things that we see a lot is that this kind of math, it's easy to get lost in it because it can be a little complicated. And employers sometimes do fudge hours, and knowing that workers might not notice, or they might not feel like they can speak up about it, or they might not be knowledgeable of the law, might not know that they have to make at least, XYZ minimum wage, hourly wage, or AWARE wage. So yeah, what Mike said, keeping track of your hours, both what you're picking and how many hours you're working, how long you're waiting around, waiting for a tractor to come back with supplies or equipment, from the moment you start working to the moment you're done working, you need to be being paid, unless it's, it's some kind of a lunch break of 30 minutes or longer. There are exceptions, but just keep track of those, and that's the best way to protect yourself and protect your income.
Right, because a lot of employers, when they're paying people by the piece, don't even bother to keep track of your hours. That's why it's important that you do it. They're not supposed to do that. They're supposed to keep track of your hours, even if you're being paid by the piece. But a lot of employers don't do that.
Okay, Diego?
Ok, entonces, ¿cuál es hablamos un poco sobre la diferencia entre el salario mínimo o entre el salario por hora y el salario por pieza? Y queríamos responder la pregunta de cuál es mejor y qué aconsejaríamos con respecto a ambos. Entonces, Nicolás explicó que muchos trabajadores le pagan por pieza y que esto puede ayudar a trabajadores más rápidos que ganen más, pero también los empleadores a veces abusan de los trabajadores más lentos y no terminan pagándole el salario mínimo cuando están pagando por pieza. Y que los trabajadores deben siempre poder ganar el salario mínimo, aunque les estén pagando por pieza o por hora, o el salario por efectos adversos de $14.29 que aplican los trabajadores H2A. Las horas que uno trabaje necesitan cumplir el salario mínimo, y la mejor forma de estar seguro que le estén pagando el salario mínimo que le aplica es tener un registro de cuántas horas está trabajando y cuánto le están pagando. Así estará seguro que le están pagando el salario mínimo. Pueden multiplicar las horas o piezas por lo que le estén pagando y compararlo con lo que debería ganar con el salario mínimo por hora multiplicado por las horas que esté trabajando. Nosotros también con LASMNY en Nueva York y Pine Tree en Maine tenemos herramientas donde puede darnos esa información, las horas o piezas que esté trabajando y cuánto le estén pagando y su estatus o el tipo de trabajador que usted es, para que nosotros podamos ver si le están pagando correctamente. Pero más importante que nada es que tenga un registro de todo, desde el momento que empieza a trabajar hasta cuando para, sin incluir sus descansos, registrar todas las horas y cuánto le estén pagando aunque le estén pagando por pieza o por hora, es la mejor forma de estar seguro que le estén pagando el salario mínimo que le aplica. Y esto es importantísimo porque aunque le estén pagando por pieza, muchos empleadores que pagan a los trabajadores así no registran sus horas. Entonces es importante que usted tenga este registro para poder estar seguro que sus derechos están siendo cumplidos.
Okay, let's touch on housing conditions. Again, something we touched on, but want to expand on. What housing conditions should agricultural workers look out for, and what can they do if the housing conditions are insufficient?
Okay, to begin with, employer-provided housing or housing provided by the farm labor contractor must be inspected each year. They must post the results of that inspection also, that is on the wall or somewhere where it can be easily visible to the workers. In general, the building must be safe and have clean water, garbage must be removed, and the terms and conditions, that is what the deal is for the housing, such as what it might cost you, must be posted at the housing. So those are some basics.
Okay, Mike?
In terms of what workers can do about it if the housing is not in good condition, it depends on, to a large extent, it depends upon whether the worker is an H-2 worker or whether they're not an H-2 worker. For people who are not H-2 workers, there is a federal law which protects farm workers and which requires that housing meet certain minimum standards, which are spelled out in detail in the law. And basically, like Nick said, you have the right to safe, sanitary housing. And if you are being housed in a place which does not meet the standards, the same law that I'm talking about gives you the right to either make a complaint to the Department of Labor or to take the employer or the person who owns the housing, which is sometimes not the employer, to court and obtain damages. If you're an H-2A worker, it's a little more complicated because that law that I was talking about, like Elena said a little earlier, doesn't apply to H-2A workers, but there is a mechanism, there is a procedure with the Department of Labor to make a complaint and ask that the situation be addressed. And in both of those situations, Pine Tree and or LASMNY, depending upon where you are, can advise you in more detail about what the process is and assist you in making complaints.
Yeah, and to add to that, in New York, if you're not at an H-2A farm, what avenues you have to address the situation might differ depending on the type of camp you're living in, whether it's year-round or whether it's more seasonal. And it gets a little complicated about which agency is inspecting it and how often they have to be inspected and whether they have to be inspected. But I guess I would say in terms of what to look out for, when you arrive at housing in the place where you're going to work, is to listen to your gut. If something doesn't feel right or you feel unsafe, something is probably wrong. And if you have questions about it, call Pine Tree. If you live in New England, call us, or you live and work in New England, or call us if you live and work in New York. And we can talk about the situation, talk about what's wrong, see if there's a law that covers it, and advise you on what can be done about it.
Okay. And I should say, if you need assistance, please reach out to LASMNY or Pine Tree. You can go to find out more about LASMNY's program if you go to lasmny.org. That's LASMNY.org. Or you can call our two helplines. One's direct, so 845-422-6624, and the other one's a toll free. Did I mess that up, Elena?
It's our WhatsApp would be 845
WhatsApp.
422 6624. Yeah.
And our toll free is 1-800-845-804-8575.
No,
Okay.
our toll free number is 1-800-804-8575.
804. And I'll go ahead and let Diego, if you want to say your website and number as well.
So our website is ptla.org, and we have information on that website in various languages, including Haitian Creole and Spanish. And I think I'll let Mike or Nicholas give the best number to reach us.
Go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, Mike.
The
207, I believe, 991-7478.
correct. That's the number to reach a person, and our WhatsApp. I think I gave you our WhatsApp number also.
207-233-2930.
Correct. Thank you.
Okay. I'll let Diego translate in Spanish.
Ok, entonces queremos responder la pregunta: ¿qué condiciones de alojamiento deberían estar viendo los trabajadores agrícolas y qué deberían hacer para que se cumplan las condiciones mínimas y los derechos mínimos de alojamiento? Entonces, Nicolás empezó por decir que los empleadores deben hacer una inspección del alojamiento cada año, y el resultado de esta inspección debe estar puesto en la pared cuando usted entre. Debe estar visible a todos. Debe haber servicios de basura y agua limpia, y si le cuesta algo el alojamiento, el trabajador debe... esto debe estar explicado a los trabajadores viviendo ahí, visible a todos. Ahora, las protecciones de alojamiento dependen si uno es un trabajador H2A o si es un trabajador no H2A. Para los trabajadores que no son H2A hay una ley que les protege y les da protecciones y estándares mínimos de alojamiento. El derecho al alojamiento limpio y seguro aplica en esta situación. Y si uno está en alojamiento que no cumple los estándares, tiene el derecho a tomar una acción legal contra el empleador y obtener una recompensa, o tiene el derecho a hacer una queja con el Departamento de Trabajo en el estado donde esté localizado. Si uno es un trabajador H2A, no aplica el mismo proceso ni las mismas protecciones, pero hay un mecanismo con el Departamento de Trabajo para pedir que se arregle la situación si hay un problema con su alojamiento. En ambas situaciones, si uno es un trabajador H2A o no H2A, si tiene algún problema con su alojamiento, llame a LASMNY en Nueva York o Pine Tree Legal en Maine, porque podemos aconsejarlo y ayudarle a cómo hacer estas quejas y para que conozca más sobre los derechos que le pueden aplicar. En Nueva York, queríamos clarificar que si uno no es trabajador H2A, los derechos y procesos que le aplican dependen del tipo de campamento en donde esté, porque hay diferentes agencias que inspeccionan a los campamentos comparados con otros tipos de alojamiento. Pero lo mejor es que si uno se siente inseguro, seguramente hay algo que está incorrecto y debe escuchar eso antes que nada. Si tiene alguna pregunta, llame a Pine Tree Legal si trabaja y vive en New England, o llámanos si vive y trabaja en Nueva York. Podemos revisar la situación, ver qué derechos le aplican y aconsejarlo sobre las leyes que le aplican. Nos puede llamar si vive o trabaja en Nueva York a LASMNY, y nuestro WhatsApp es 845-422-6624, o nos puede llamar sin costo a 1-800-804-8575. Si vive o trabaja en Nueva Inglaterra o Maine, visite nuestro sitio internet de ptla.org o llámenos a 207-991-7498, o también puede mandarnos un texto o llamarnos por WhatsApp a 207-233-2930. El WhatsApp es 207-233-2930.
Awesome. Thank you, Diego. Let's talk about retaliation. something that Elena was bringing up to me yesterday in our pre-conversation. But if somebody is not agreeing with their pay because the employer is trying to, mess with their math, that when they keep track, or housing conditions are poor that we mentioned, or we mentioned a little bit of the COVID vaccine, so if they're forcing them to work while they're sick, anything like that. Well, talk about retaliation. Why does it exist in the farm worker industry, and do you think people are afraid to report to Pine Tree or LASMNY? So I'll let you take that, Nicholas.
Well, unfortunately, it's a sad fact that retaliation does exist, and many workers are fearful, and many of them are fearful rightly, and are reluctant to complain or come to us with complaints for fear of being retaliated against at work. That is, they might have a resulting, if they make a complaint of, they might be given a less job, they could be fired, or something else, and they could be worried about that. For this reason, many workers come to us after the season's over. However, there's always a fear of retaliation by the grower employer, but it should be noted that retaliation is against the law, and the Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Worker Protection Act specifically provides remedies under that. Unfortunately, some of these remedies can take time.
Okay. Mike?
Not much to add to that. Nick's right. It does happen. It is against the law. And if it happens to you, call us, and we will do everything we can to help you figure out what your legal rights are in the situation that you find yourself.
Yeah, and Alex, you asked, why might retaliation exist? I think it's a way to control the people who work for you. I think it's a way to instill fear in people who need a job and don't want to lose their jobs. And I mean, like Mike said, the best, maybe not the best, but one of the things to do is to give us a call. Everything we talk about is going to be confidential, and no one at Pine Tree, no one at LASMNY is going to do something on your behalf in your name without your express permission first, and without talking about it with you first. And in a lot of instances, there are laws that protect you even if you're just calling to talk to a lawyer, depending on the state you're in or what type of work you are, what type of worker you are, in terms of federal protections. And so just to reiterate what Mike said, if you call us, we can talk it through. It can be a private conversation, so at least you understand where you stand and what laws you're protected by.
Okay. I'll let Diego translate.
Ok, entonces hablamos sobre el tema de represalia, por qué existe y por qué pensamos que los trabajadores agrícolas en particular temen reportar o hacer quejas a sus empleadores o a organizaciones de ayuda legal. Y empezamos por decir que sí, honestamente sí existe la represalia y hay muchos trabajadores que temen hacer quejas a sus trabajadores o a organizaciones de ayuda legal porque temen que los empleadores no le den trabajo la próxima temporada o que hasta los despidan en ese momento. Y por esta razón muchos trabajadores agrícolas vienen a hablar con nosotros después de la temporada. Pero lo más importante es que la represalia es ilegal. La ley laboral para la protección de trabajadores agrícolas tiene protecciones y procesos que aplican cuando hay represalia, pero la verdad es que también estos procesos toman tiempo para cumplir. Pero si hay represalia, llámenos a nosotros, porque podemos ayudarlo, podemos ver la situación y aconsejarlo sobre sus derechos y qué pasos puede tomar para que se cumplan. Y finalmente, con el tema de represalia, bueno, la verdad es que la represalia existe para controlar y para aprovecharse de gente que está en una situación precaria. lo mejor es que nos llame y podemos ayudarlo. Y como dijimos, aconsejarlo, pero nunca haremos nada sin su permiso, ni hablaremos de su caso con nadie sin su permiso. Entonces no debe temer nada así con nosotros. También es importante que sepa que hasta hay protecciones y leyes que le aplican hasta solamente si llama a una organización de ayuda legal, también puede estar protegido hasta tomar un tipo de acción así. Llámenos y podemos aconsejarlo para que sepa las leyes que le aplican y ayudarlo con estar seguro que se cumplan esas leyes, esos derechos.
Okay. One thing I would be remiss if we didn't talk about and touch on working during COVID and being sick. Have you seen any outbreaks at any farms over the period of the pandemic? Are workers entitled to PPE, personal protective equipment, on the front lines, as they have been demonstrated essential workers during this time? So, Nicholas, I'll let you respond.
It's ironic that farm workers and agricultural workers are considered essential workers, but many of the protections mandated in some other areas have not necessarily been mandated or regulated for farm workers. So the CDC has issued guidance for farm workers, which provides for many of the things that we have heard about: maintaining social distancing, use of masks, and good sanitary habits such as washing your hands frequently. Unfortunately, this has been really hard to practice when it comes to farm workers, and it has not been evenly enforced or acknowledged or recognized by growers or farmers. For example, there's a mandated distance of at least 3 feet underneath the Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Worker Protection Act between bedding in worker housing. The CDC has recommended that we be no more than 6 feet, no less than 6 feet between beds to maintain the social distancing. Some farmers have complied with that, some have not. Some have reduced the density of their housing and others have not. So unfortunately, without concrete regulations, it's been difficult to enforce when it's only recommendations. And this has been across the boards with lots of the CDC recommendations.
Okay, Mike?
For workers here in Maine, if you've been to Maine before, you probably already know this, but we have a very good health program, a mobile health program for farm workers here in Maine. And they did very good work in the last year in terms of helping workers get tested when they arrived in Maine. And they are in the process now of preparing to make sure that workers receive the vaccinations that they're entitled to. So if you come to Maine and you believe and you haven't been tested and you'd like to be, or you believe that you might be entitled to the vaccine and you'd like to get it, let the Maine Mobile Health Program know or call us, and we'll put you directly in touch with somebody who can answer all your questions. And if your employer is doing things that you believe are putting you in danger, you should also get in touch with us. We will do what we can to figure out if you have legal rights and help you to enforce those.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add except to your question about whether there were outbreaks. We did have some pretty significant outbreaks here, especially early on in the pandemic. Just to echo Mike, we are working on, when farm workers will, be eligible. I mean, some farm workers, given, if your age, you have certain pre-existing conditions, are already eligible for the vaccine. Working on when farm workers as a whole will be eligible for the vaccine. And, New York did have, or does have a paid sick leave law that has to do with COVID. So if you think that you're sick or someone is sick, someone you're near is sick, again, I would urge you to give us a call so we can talk about your options. We do our departments of health have sort of split up by county and sometimes by region, so it can be a little disjointed or hard to figure out sort of who is covering where, but we can sort of help you figure out, what's best for your health and your family's health, and help locate you also to a clinic that specifically helps farm workers or a department of health.
Okay. Diego, go ahead. Says like I'm trying to unmute you, Diego, but there you go.
Oh, there we go. Ok, entonces discutimos el tema de trabajar durante la epidemia y la enfermedad durante la epidemia y cómo ha afectado a las diferentes granjas y a los trabajadores agrícolas y qué protecciones le aplican. Entonces empezamos por decir que la ironía es que las protecciones para muchos trabajadores esenciales no se han aplicado o extendido a trabajadores agrícolas, quienes son tan importantes. El CDC le ha dado instrucciones y recomendaciones para trabajadores agrícolas, pero estas no se han cumplido o reconocido por muchos empleadores. Por ejemplo, los trabajadores agrícolas deben estar no menos de 6 pies, deben haber no menos de 6 pies entre camas donde duermen los trabajadores agrícolas en su alojamiento, pero hay muchos empleadores que no han cumplido estas recomendaciones y hay algunos otros que sí lo han cumplido. Pero lo difícil es que son solamente recomendaciones y no regulaciones o leyes, entonces estas protecciones a veces no pueden hacer cumplirse. Para los trabajadores en Maine, los abogados de Pine Tree dijeron que hay un programa de salud móvil muy bueno en el estado que se llama el Maine Mobile Health Program, o el programa de salud móvil en Maine. Ellos han hecho un trabajo muy bueno durante el último año de examinar a trabajadores que están entrando para COVID y ahora están trabajando en asegurar la vacuna para nuevos trabajadores. Si usted está entrando a Maine como un trabajador agrícola y tiene preguntas o dudas sobre el COVID o la vacuna, llame al Maine Mobile Health Program o llámenos a Pine Tree para asegurar que se cumplan las leyes y recomendaciones y protecciones de COVID. Ahora en Nueva York, sí tuvimos unos brotes de la pandemia en 2020 y ahora estamos trabajando para asegurar que los trabajadores agrícolas en Nueva York tengan derecho a la vacuna, y también es importante que sepan que hay una ley para tiempo pagado por enfermedades que aplica durante la epidemia, que si nos llama podemos explicar y ver si le aplica en su caso. Si tiene cualquier pregunta o necesita cualquier tipo de cuidado médico, o tiene preguntas sobre la vacuna o las protecciones bajo COVID, llámenos y podemos conectarlo con el programa de salud o aconsejarlo sobre estas protecciones, leyes y recomendaciones.
Okay, down to the final 2 questions. Talk about any tax implications for agricultural workers that they should look out for.
Well, in general, taxes should be withheld from paychecks at the time workers are paid. There also should have withheld what we call standard deductions for unemployment insurance and Social Security. That is, except for H-2A workers who will not have Social Security withheld from their paychecks because they're not eligible for the program because they're here on H-2A visas. One note, it's important to file taxes every year, but more importantly, maybe even this year, because if there are stimulus payments that the federal government has issued, if a worker has not received, because they've been moving or they just haven't received a stimulus payment, there was one for $1,400 minimum and there was another one for $600 minimum. If they haven't received these stimulus payments when they file their taxes, this would be an opportunity to receive those payments. So this year, it's more important than ever that farm workers filed their taxes on time, and that's usually April 1st. It was extended last year, but usually it's by April 1st.
Mike?
Actually, I think that's the 15th, isn't it?
The 15th? My mistake.
$1,200 check too, I think.
Oh, $1,200. Okay, so I made 2 mistakes. $1,200 and $600, and April 15th.
Here at Pine Tree, we have a special project to help people who have tax problems. And if you're having a problem with your taxes, again, give us a call. And we have an attorney on our staff who specializes in helping people with tax problems. Unfortunately, we can't help you actually file your return. That's not part of what we're able to do. But if you're having a problem with the IRS and you're having difficulty, if you've been told you owe back taxes or similar problems like that, give us a call. We can help.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add, but just with regard to specifically H-2A workers, we've gotten a lot of calls asking whether they're entitled to the stimulus payments or not. And it's sort of going to depend on whether you file your taxes as a resident or as a non-resident. And that's kind of another complicated math problem of how long you've spent in the US for this year and the 2 years before that. So that's something best answered by a tax preparer. But if you do qualify as a resident, then you should be qualified for both stimulus payments. At first, married couples who, for instance, if one part of the married couple had a social security number, but the other had an ITIN, they weren't qualified, but now they are. So if you're one of those individuals who didn't get one last year because because your spouse has an ITIN, like Mike and Nick said, it's really important that you file taxes this year because you may be entitled to claim it now because the law did change in the meantime.
Okay. Diego.
Ok, entonces hablamos sobre qué deberían saber los trabajadores agrícolas sobre sus impuestos. Lo importante es que los impuestos deberían sacarse del pago de los trabajadores. Se deben hacer deducciones para seguridad social y desempleo, excepto que los trabajadores H2A no tienen que tener deducciones para la seguridad social. Lo más importante es que usted declare impuestos cada año, porque es importante no solamente en otros años, pero ahora durante la epidemia más que nunca para que pueda recibir los pagos de estímulos si califica. El año pasado hubieron 2 pagos de $1,200 y este año un pago de $600. Y si no ha recibido estos pagos, lo que puede hacer es declarar impuestos para el año 2020 este año, y lo tiene que hacer antes del 15 de abril, porque si califica es posible que reciba los pagos retroactivamente. Ahora nosotros en el estado de Maine y con la organización de Pine Tree tenemos una ahogada de impuestos con un programa para impuestos que se llama el Low Income Taxpayer Clinic, y si nos llama podemos conectarla con ella si califica y ver si puede recibir estos pagos ahora o retroactivamente. En Nueva York también han recibido muchas llamadas LASMNY con preguntas sobre si le aplican el estímulos y si es posible recibir el estímulos ahora o retroactivamente. Y también esto es algo que depende de cómo está declarando, si está declarando como residente o no residente. Y esta pregunta es algo que podría responder un preparador de impuestos. Pero también es importante que sepa que si califica como residente, debería poder recibir el estímulo. El año pasado, parejas en las que un miembro no tenía el estatus suficiente o tenía un número 18, a veces no estaban recibiendo el estímulo por una excepción que ahora se ha arreglado y es posible que reciba el estímulo haciendo una declaración de impuestos para el año 2020, otra vez antes del 15 de abril, para que reciba el pago retroactivamente. Pero se tendrá que hacer con una declaración de impuestos para el año 2020.
Okay. Final question is possible mention. You guys can expand on the Agricultural Protection Act and its importance, or really just kind of a free question. You can talk about the importance of farm workers in our community, how important they are, or just your outreach to potential farm worker clients, what you're currently doing there. I'll leave it up to you how you want to answer. Go ahead, Nicholas.
Well, to begin with, there's a federal law that is designed to protect farm workers, agricultural workers. It's called the Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Worker Protection Act. That's a long name, but it provides for important protections for seasonal and migrant agricultural workers. So let's talk about the basics of the act. Under the act, you must receive accurate information about the job when you're recruited. You must receive accurate and complete wage statements. You must have clean, safe when it's housing, especially employer-provided housing. If you're transported in employer-supplied vehicles, it must be safe. The contractor, the employer, must keep their promises to you. And finally, you must have prompt payment of all your wages when they're due. So that's a basic outline of the federal act that governs migrant and seasonal agricultural workers.
Okay. Mike? Mike, you're muted.
I apologize.
No worries.
Farm workers do some of the most important work in our community. They literally harvest the food that we all eat. They're indispensable to our well-being, and it is an ironic and tragic thing that farm workers are often treated as badly as they are when they literally keep us all alive. Those of us who you see on the screen, our job is to try to help farm workers protect their rights and hopefully make your lives a little bit better. So if there's anything that we can do, please let us know. We're here to help.
Elena?
Yeah, and just to add off what Mike is saying, I think that the way farm workers are treated oftentimes is that, the employer is here and they're here, but it really should be an equal relationship, because the employer wouldn't have a business without the workers. The workers are an absolutely essential part of the employer's life. And so part of what we're trying to do is sort of level that playing field so that it's more of an equal playing field.
Okay. Diego, I'll let you translate, and then we'll just do some closing thank yous. Go ahead.
Ok, hablamos un poco sobre la importancia de la ley de la protección de los trabajadores agrícolas. Entonces, para empezar, esta ley dice que su empleador debe respetar la descripción de trabajo que recibió antes de tomar el trabajo o la orden del trabajo, y que deben haber declaraciones precisas y completas de su salario y cuánto le están pagando, sea por pieza o sea por hora. Se debe respetar la protección del alojamiento seguro y limpio, y su transporte debe estar también seguro, y su contratista o su empleador debe cumplir todas las promesas que le han hecho para poner esta ley compleja y extensa en términos básicos. Mike y Alaina terminaron por decir que los trabajadores agrícolas hacen algunos de los trabajos más importantes en nuestras comunidades, que son esenciales para las vidas de todos en este país. Nos ayudan a comer la comida que necesitamos para vivir, y es una gran ironía que la gente que nos deja vivir no tenga sus derechos básicos protegidos. Y por eso nosotros estamos acá para ayudarlos, y insistimos que nos llame o nos diga si tiene cualquier problema, porque estamos acá para usted. Alaina terminó con decir que los trabajadores son importantísimos, y que la razón que nosotros estamos acá como organizaciones de ayuda legal es para intentar de equilibrar la relación entre los empleadores y los trabajadores para que sea más justa.
Okay. I want to thank everyone on the call. Elena, who is in our Farm Worker Law Project office in New Paltz, New York. Thanks so much. And Pine Tree legal assistants, Nicholas, Diego, and Mike. Thank you so much. I know that Pine Tree and LASMNY have enjoyed a special relationship over the years with some cost-saving outreach. And yeah, thank you so much. Do you guys want to add anything at all before I give out the number and the website again?
No, thank you for the opportunity today.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
No, thanks for
Thanks a lot.
organizing us, Alex.
Okay, to reach Legal Aid Society of Mid New York, if you are a farm worker in New York State, you can go to lasmny.org/farmworker and find out about our program. That's LASMNY.org. You can reach us at our phone number, our WhatsApp. Correct me if I'm wrong, Elena. 845-422-6624. And our 1-800 number is 1-800-804-8575.
Yes.
And Pine Tree Legal Assistance. If you are a farm worker in Maine, you can go to their website, which is translated in many languages, but Spanish in specific, ptla.org. And their number, if you need legal assistance, is 207-991-7478. And their WhatsApp is 207-233-2930. I'll let Diego translate the final piece.
Ok, entonces queríamos decirle gracias a todos los que estuvieron en esta llamada y terminar por dejar nuestra información. Si es un trabajador agrícola en Nueva York y necesita asistencia legal, puede ir a nuestra página, a nuestro sitio de internet, que se puede encontrar a lasmny.org /FARMWORKER o llámenos a nuestro WhatsApp de 845-422-6624 o nuestro número de 1-800-804-8575. Y si es un trabajador agrícola en Pine Tree y necesita ayuda legal en el estado de Maine o New England, puede encontrar nuestra página a ptla.org o llamarnos a 207-991-7478 o por WhatsApp a 207-233-2930.
All right, thank you all. I will end the broadcast